Hello, this is Betsy Hill, and I am delighted to have an opportunity to give you a demonstration and some background on BrainWare SAFARI, the cognitive skills development software. So just as a little bit of background about BrainWare Learning Company, we are all about the practical application of neuroscience. We have four main programs, one of which is BrainWare SAFARI, which will be our focus today. But we also have a cognitively based reading program called Skate Kids and a cognitive assessment called MindPrint. All of this gives us background and the ability to do professional development on a variety of aspects of the teaching and learning process that benefit from neuroscience. So when we talk about cognitive skills, this is a chart that we use to describe what we mean. So up at the top of this chart are the things that we want for all of our students, or all of our workers, all of our children, where we want them to be able to get as far as they can academically, to have a career that is satisfying to them and helps them support their families, and that they are healthy and stay out of jail, for that matter. So all of that is at the top of the chart. Underneath it are the things that we believe and assume need to be in place for them to accomplish that. They need to be able to read, they need to be able to do math, they need to have some technology skills. What we don't always think about is the fact that underneath all of this is cognitive infrastructure, the ability to learn. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about cognitive skills. So at the very bottom of the chart is a box that contains what we refer to as foundational cognitive skills. These are skills like attention, visual processing, processing speed, sequential processing. These are the basic ways that information gets into our brains from the outside world. And if they're happening efficiently and accurately, that's great. We get a really good start to the learning process because it all starts with that. But sometimes it's not the case. And then, of course, the learning process is not going to be as effective, and we may see some struggles. The box on top of that contains some cognitive skills that are now being referred to as executive functions. These are the directive capacities of our mind. And there are three core executive functions: working memory, inhibitory control, and cognitive flexibility. Working memory refers to our ability to hold information in our minds while we think about it. Inhibitory control, pretty much what it sounds like, our ability to stop ourselves from doing something we would otherwise do, like punching somebody in the nose when we get mad at them. But it's also our ability to do that over a longer period of time, for example, to defer gratification over a longer duration. And then cognitive flexibility is our ability to shift our mindset when the rules of the world around us change. So when we learn something new or something that challenges our mental model of how things work in the world and we have to adjust that, that refers to cognitive flexibility. And then on top of that are higher order executive functions. These are things like reasoning and problem solving, planning, critical thinking, creativity. And of course, these are the things that we are emphasizing more and more in our education system, whatever standards we may be using or whatever taxonomy we may use. And what we're showing here is that all of this sits underneath reading and math and technology. And that's really an important concept. So what these red arrows represent is the fact that as educators, most of the time we get asked to teach students reading and math and technology and everything else that sits on top of that without really having any idea whether our students have this cognitive infrastructure, whether they have solid cognitive skills underneath them to be able to learn these various other skills and activities. And this is where BrainWare comes in, because even if you knew about it, you might not be able to do something about it, and that's really why BrainWare SAFARI was developed. So just a little bit more about the connection between cognitive skills and our academic skills. In this chart, we're looking at some of the cognitive processes associated with reading. And when I talk to most educators, most teachers, and ask them what the basics of reading are, Typically, I will hear something like decoding and fluency and comprehension. And indeed, those are critical skills. We cannot be good readers without them, but they are also not the most basic. There is, in fact, no decoding part of our brain. There is no fluency part of our brain. These processes require us to assemble and to manage a whole bunch of cognitive processes all at the same time. And of course, they need to be at that automatic level in order for us to do that. So for example, in decoding, if I can't sustain my attention or visually discriminate quickly between a B and a P or an M and an N, or if the letters get jumbled or the words get jumbled in terms of their order and sequence when they're coming into my brain, I'm going to have a tough time decoding. The same applies with fluency. Fluency requires us to be able to take in information at a glance, which is visual span, shift our attention smoothly between one word and the next or one line and the next. That's flexible attention. And of course, our processing speed is going to impact the fluency with which we can read. When it comes to comprehension, this is where rubber really meets the road, and where some of these cognitive skills, especially those that we think about as executive functions, really come into play. So if you think about what's happening when you're reading, you're taking in pieces of information and you're holding them in your mind while you add additional information to that. That happens in working memory. It is our only conscious processing. And then if we encounter a word or a phrase or a concept we don't understand and we have to pause to figure out what it is or ask somebody about it or look it up or something like that, and then we have to bring it back and hopefully not have to start reading all over again, that again happens in working memory. Visualization is our ability to create a mental image of something that we're reading about. It might be to visualize a scene that's being described, or it might be to create and visualize and hold in our mind relationships between different ideas. So all of these are required for reading, and then we're going to see that basically the same principles apply in math. Starting with spatial representations, which there's been a great deal of recent research on that really makes it clear that our visual spatial understanding is absolutely core to our ability to do math. And it turns out that it is a key part of everything from basic counting all the way up through algebra and calculus. So there, our spatial memory, our visualization, our understanding of directionality, and our ability to impose directions on other objects and rotate them and move them around in our minds is going to be very important. I also have information manipulation here. That refers to our ability to sort through what I used to call the story problem. We don't call them that anymore, or word problems, because in fact, just about everything in math is a story problem these days. It's always about application to some real world situation. So we have to take in the problem, the situation, the various elements of it. We have to keep them straight. We have to keep them in sequence. We have to track where we are in solving a multi-step equation, for example. And all of that requires, again, some of these same cognitive skills. And then ultimately, math is very logical. So our ability to reason, to draw inferences, to plan how we're going to attack something are all going to be necessary in math. And of course, as you can see, some of these same skills are used in reading. We don't have two different brains that we use one to use to read and one to do math. We use the same brain for all of them. So now let's talk a little bit about BrainWare SAFARI. BrainWare is a software program that develops 41 cognitive skills, basically all of those skills that were in that pyramid that we saw on that first slide. It does it in a very comprehensive and integrated way. It comes from work that has been done in a clinical setting for many, many years. So if you're familiar with the work that speech pathologists do, or vision developmental experts, or other kinds of learning specialists, you have a pretty good idea probably of some of what went into BrainWare. What happened was a group of clinicians from various different disciplines started to collaborate, and over the course of about 40 years, they pooled their various therapeutic techniques that they had in their disciplines, and created and refined a set of exercises that were very effective in helping individuals, particularly those with learning disabilities. But of course, it was very, very labor intensive and very time consuming. So what we did is we took that set of exercises that were based on clinical therapy and married them with video game technology. So it's now available to a much broader group and in a much more scalable way. I want to share a little bit of the research on the impact of BrainWare with you. And as I do that, what I'd like you to keep in mind is that the recommended usage for the program is 3 to 5 times a week for about 30 to 45 minutes over 10 to 14 weeks. That would be a typical implementation or intervention with BrainWare SAFARI, and from ages 6 all the way up through adult. So this is a slide that shows the results from our original peer-reviewed published research. These were students in 1st through 7th grades with a range of abilities. I like to call them garden variety students. So some struggled a little bit, some were probably gifted, some just sort of normal kids in the middle. And the pre-test and post-test in this case was the Woodcock-Johnson cognitive battery, and then some of the academic achievement tests. And what we're looking at here is the scores expressed as an age equivalent. So when you take this test, or a test like the Woodcock-Johnson, it will tell you that based on your score, you performed on this test perhaps as an average 10-year-old. Now, you might be 8 years old, but you still performed like an average 10-year-old because you were a little more advanced cognitively than a typical 8-year-old would be. Or you could be behind, and you might be 14 and only have the cognitive capacity or the cognitive ability of an average 10-year-old. So we did the pre-test and the post-test for a group that used BrainWare for those 12 weeks, and a group that was part of a control group just going about their normal everyday routines. And you can see the difference. So the control group improved their cognitive ability over those 12 weeks by 4 months. So that was 4 months improvement in 3 months of time, which is pretty much what you would expect. What you don't necessarily expect, unless you have experience with a cognitive intervention like BrainWare SAFARI, is an improvement in those 12 weeks of 4 years and 3 months. So a really dramatic change in the cognitive ability of the students who were in the BrainWare group, and all of them improved their cognitive ability across the board, each of them. This kind of result has been replicated in other studies, so it's not just a one-time thing. It is proven to be able to be repeated with different populations, different people administering the assessment, different people, different types of students, different parts of the country, all those kinds of things. And you can also see that the cognitive impact starts to tell in their academic ability. So the BrainWare group improved their performance on the academic tests by almost 2 years versus just 1 month for the control group. And these were tests of math fluency, reading fluency, passage comprehension, that kind of thing. I want to share just another couple of studies with you. This next one was part of Dr. Avson's doctoral dissertation, where she was working with students with specific learning disabilities. And she divided them again into a control group, and then there was a group that used BrainWare. These students, because of their SLD diagnosis, were receiving the typical reading and math interventions to which they were entitled in their school. But of course, only the BrainWare group also received the BrainWare intervention. Again, in this study, Dr. Avson used the Woodcock-Johnson cognitive battery. But in this case, she translated the scores into something called a relative proficiency index, an RPI. Now, an RPI of 90% is what would be expected of a normally developing student. And you can see, if you look at the light blue bar and the light green bar above the cognitive section on this chart, these students were performing on the pre-test a little bit above 60% proficiency. So a pretty big gap between 90%, which would be considered normally developing, and 60%, which is where these kids were. And that is just makes perfect sense, because by definition, we know that students with SLD have cognitive deficits compared to their more normally developing peers. So they used the program, used BrainWare SAFARI, consistent with our recommended usage for about 12 weeks. And in this case, you can see there was not much change cognitively for the control group, but a big change for the group that used BrainWare. And in fact, on post-test, the students who used BrainWare on average scored at 89% proficiency, so virtually closing the gap to what would be considered normally developing. And you can also see the impact it had on reading and on math. For the BrainWare group, it was an improvement of 0.8 of a grade equivalent in reading and a full grade equivalent in math in those 12 weeks. Dr. Apson also then divided and reported on the various subtest areas within the Woodcock-Johnson. And this is nice because it allows us to connect it very directly to some of those underlying cognitive skills and executive functions that we were talking about when we looked at that chart at the beginning. So what you're seeing are the various subtests across the bottom, and then the pre- and post-test scores for both the control group and the BrainWare group. Remembering that 90% is what we expect of a normally developing student, you can see how low these students were in some areas. Things like verbal working memory, short-term memory, attention skills, even to some degree, those executive functions were very, very low for these students. But with BrainWare, across the board, we're getting them very close to, sometimes even surpassing, the level that would be considered normally developing. So this is important to keep in mind as we think about how we can support students with learning disabilities, where we have typically relied on accommodations, adjustments to the curriculum, specific learning strategies, all of which are really important. But we can add to that the ability to actually remediate some of these underlying skills so that these students can learn and make the kind of progress we really would like to see them make academically. One of the questions that typically arises at this point is whether these gains are sustained after students stop using the program. And this is some results of a study that was done in Canada, in Ontario, where all of the third graders across the district used BrainWare SAFARI in the fall of this particular year. And they used the Canadian Cognitive Abilities Test, that is the Canadian equivalent of the COGAT. And both of these tests are divided into a verbal section, a quantitative section, a nonverbal section, and then they report a composite score for each individual student. The way that it's typically reported is as an age percentile ranking. So they compare your score to everybody else's your age, and they tell you what percentile you ranked in. You can see that these students in September, before they started using BrainWare, were performing below the median. They were performing between the sort of 45th down to, for example, in quantitative, to the 30th percentile. So a little bit low performing. I can also tell you that this was an economically disadvantaged population. They took the test again mid-year after they had used BrainWare. So you can see the jump between the light blue bar and the darker blue bar. And then they stopped using the program and did not use it. But the schools went ahead and administered the test again in June, so 6 months, 5 months after they had stopped using the program. And you can see that the skills and the levels of performance continue to grow in some cases, but at least are sustained over that period of time. And this is consistent with other research that we have done and seen to show that. The important thing to think about here is that what we're doing with BrainWare, and I'm going to show you the demo in just a moment, is really trying to get these skills to the level of automaticity, because when they're there, they're just there for the kids to use. And when students are in a classroom, they're having demands put on all of these skills all the time. And so we would expect them. They continue to practice them. They continue to use them. All right. So now it's time for our demonstration. And what I need to do now is to share my screen. And I'm going to do that right this minute. Okay, I am now sharing my screen, I am told. And so what I want to do is I'm going to go and we're going to take a look at BrainWare SAFARI. I'm actually going to go out of here and we're going to have hear some of the sounds, the jungle sounds in the background here. And all of these different areas are, the highlighted ones are the various exercises in BrainWare. Now, the kids will typically call them games, and that's fine because we want them to experience this as much like a video game as possible. But we know, we call them exercises because we know they came from serious clinical therapy and that they're not just random games. So what I want to do is just give you a little bit of a flavor for the program and then encourage you to explore more on your own. I'm going to start with an exercise called Bear Shuffle. Now, students playing the game will all start at level 1. This just lets me choose a level so that I can jump around and show you some different things in the program as part of this demonstration. There are instructions in the program. You can listen to them being read aloud. In this case, what I'm going to do is simply explain it to you as we do it. So I'm going to click Start Challenge, and the computer is going to give us 3 cards and turn them face up and then turn them back over so we can't see them. And our job, and I always like to say at this point, this is the audience participation part, so hopefully you're going to play along with me, is to get them into numeric order from smallest to largest. So I can remember, even though I can't see the cards, that it was a 3 and a 6 and a 5. And so I'm going to pick that end card up and move it to the middle. It should be in numeric order now. Let's see. So I got that right. Now at each level, we have to do it correctly 7 out of 10 times. And up here on the upper right, where you see the W and the L, that's for wins and losses. And you can see I've done it correctly 1 time and have no losses yet. So if I did it 6 more times, I would be able to go to the next level. And if not, I would just get to try again. What I'm going to do, though, is not repeat that because I can jump around. And of course, it gives me encouragement to keep trying and not to give up. But of course, what I want to do now is jump up to a different level and show you a little bit about how it gets more challenging. So this time, instead of 3 cards, there are going to be 4. And after the computer turns the cards back over again, and we can't see the numbers, it's going to switch 2 cards, and then it's going to switch 2 more cards, and then we still have to get it into numeric order. So that probably sounds quite a bit more difficult, but remember, I jumped over a few levels, and you would be working your way up to it. But this can be rather challenging, so let's try it together. So the computer is going to open these, uncover the cards, 9102. Now this is the computer moving it. Okay, so I'm not sure that I actually remember that. I think I was thinking about some other things. I don't know. Is that the 9? And I don't know. I'll probably get this wrong. Oh my gosh. I remembered more than I thought I did. So anyway, but you can see that it does get pretty challenging, and hopefully you were able to follow along and remember that. So if we go back now and look in the instructions, we can actually see all the skills that are being developed in this exercise. We can get that for any of the exercises. So here we're working on sustained attention, selective attention, divided attention, sequential processing, visualization, processing speed, some of those very, very short-term memory skills, that just how we hold it in our minds just for a very short period of time, working memory, and also spatial and sequential memory. So there's a lot going on here. And one of the things also to point out is that these skills are developed also in other exercises, but in different ways and different combinations. And that's one of the important features of BrainWare, and one of the reasons that we believe it has such a significant impact is that we are developing these skills in that very integrated way where they all can work together. All right, again, I would have to do this 7 out of 10 times to pass the level. But what I'm going to do now is I am going to go to a different exercise. This one is called Iguana Lookout. And if we took a look at the skills, we're going to see some of those same skills that we were developing before, but things like visual discrimination and directionality. Big emphasis on directionality in this exercise, which is knowing left and right, but also being able to project those directions onto other objects. And we'll see how that happens in just a moment when we get to that higher level. But we're going to start level 1. And when I click Start Challenge, I get a bunch of arrows. And you can see the buttons at the bottom, right, left, up, and down. And all I have to do is to observe the direction of the arrow and click on the button that corresponds to that. So the first one's pointing down, and the next two are pointing left, and then up, and then left, and then down. And if I make a mistake like this, I get encouragement. And then you can see the one that I made the mistake on. And I just click, I start challenge again, like in any video game, and I get a brand new set of arrows. They're all randomly delivered. So as many times as you need to do this to build up that fluency with your directions, you're never going to be seeing the same set of arrows again. And it's not about memorizing. It's about really being able to fluently identify the directions they're pointing. So I'm not going to finish this level. What I'm going to do is, again, jump up to give you a sense for what the levels and how we build up in the progression. So this is level 4. And again, of course, I've skipped over a few levels. We're going to be building up to this. And this time, it's very interesting because what the directions tell us is that we're going to do 2 arrows differently. So we're going to get a bunch of arrows again, but we're not going to always name the direction of the arrow. Right and left we're going to do normally, but if the button is, or the arrow is pointing up, then we're going to click down. If the arrow is pointing down, we're going to click up. So let's see how we do with this one. Okay, the arrow's pointing down, but I remember now, don't click down, I'm going to click up. Now, left I do normally, and then up, and then right, and then up, and left, and right, and up, and down. And on we would go. So we need to be able to have that cognitive flexibility to shift our mindset and remember. We have to have a little bit of inhibitory control so that we don't just automatically click on the direction that we know to be up or down. So that will gives you a little tour of that one. There's one more, and again, we could choose any of them, and they're all have their own characteristics and sets of skills that they work on. But I'm going to go ahead and go into web weaving at level 2. And I'll explain level 1 as we do this. So when I click Start Challenge, I'm going to get a design on the spider web on the left. And then it disappears. And I have my little spider, and I'm able to, with that, click on these buttons to draw lines to replicate the image. Now, if this were level 1, I would just go ahead and click those buttons to draw those lines. But now this is level 2, and I'm hoping that you can hear. You may not be able to because of the platform that I'm recording on. But what I can hear is a metronome beat. And what I need to do now is I need to click to that beat 5 times before I draw the image. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now I can go ahead and draw it. And I think, if I remember it anyway, I think that's it. Let's see. Okay, I did it. So I like to say this is really what we ask kids to do in school all day long, every day. There's visual information on the blackboard, whiteboard, smartboard, whatever it happens to be. And then there's distraction. There's something which is, we're purposely distracting it with that clicking to the beat and asking them to hold on to that visual information for a while where they're doing that distracting activity. It's the skills that we use to listen to the teacher and take notes at the same time, to be distracted by something that happens in the classroom and then come back and still have the information in our minds. For example, for writing down assignments from the board or something like that. So that's just a very quick tour of BrainWare. I wanted to point out that the students can come back in and check on their progress board. It would be personalized, so wherever you see player name throughout the program, that would be the student's name. And they can click on the progress board and they get gold bars for the levels that they've passed. So this is a quick way for them to check on their own progress. But we have a different reporting tool that we provide to the teacher. So I'm going to leave BrainWare now. And I am going to pull up what we call the coach view. So this is we like to talk about players and coaches because it's like a video game and you can always benefit from. Oh dear, this is not going to work for me today. So what I am going to do is, and I did not put it, I took it actually out of the presentation. I have screenshots. And I don't know why it's doing that. I'm going to try it one more time. Okay, that was just some incomprehensible, unexplainable moment of craziness in the internet. So here is the coach view. And what you'll see when you log in is all of your students, all your players, how many levels they've completed, when they first and last logged in, and the number of login days. So most students will not, there are 168 total levels in the program, and most students will not complete all of them in 12 weeks. That doesn't mean they have to stop then. They can keep going. The reason, of course, that we talk about 12 weeks is that we know that that's the kind of usage that will drive significant gains in cognitive ability if done appropriately. And then for each individual student, of course, the login days let us track that and keep track of whether they're on the path to completing the number of sessions in those 12 weeks that we want them to see. And then we can click on the details link for any individual student. And what we're going to see here are all of the exercises and every level of every exercise. And then what we're seeing here is the number of attempts that have been made and whether or not the level has been passed. So there's a key at the bottom that explains that this red rectangle means they haven't completed that level yet, and the blue star means they've completed all of that exercise. So what we can tell is a number of different things from this report. We can see instantly, just at a glance, that this student hasn't done any of cave comparisons, hasn't done any of slithering symbols, but has completed some of the exercises completely. And of course, what we would like them to be doing is to keep relatively even in terms of the number of levels that they've passed across the program. So this allows the teacher as the coach to help the student understand that they should be, they might assign, let's say, so Kelsey, for the first 10 minutes today, I want you to work in cave comparisons, and the next 10 minutes you can work in slithering symbols, and then at the end of the session, you can choose what exercise you want to work in. The other thing we can do is we start to really get a sense for where some of the cognitive strengths and where some of the cognitive weaknesses are for our students, which can tell us a lot about their learning profile and about how they can approach and be successful in their academics. So for example, if I take Iguana Lookout, that is the exercise that I showed you with the arrows that we had to name the directions of. And you can see that the student passed level 1 with 4 attempts, level 2 with 3 attempts, Level 3 with 5 attempts, pretty consistent. Starts to bump up a little bit here. This is the level where we had to identify and click on up for down and down for up. And then the next level, where it jumps to 16, is where she was asked to name the direction the arrow was pointing if it were rotated 90 degrees clockwise. So that process of mental rotation is obviously a little bit harder for her. So we're going to expect when we see the student trying to do things like read a map or deal with rotating objects in geometry or things like that, that those may be a little bit more challenging, but she is getting them and she is really building those skills here. I also do want to point out, in case you're looking at this, that the student did in fact do 205 attempts at level 5 of Jungle Labyrinth and hasn't passed it yet. Jungle Labyrinth is a maze exercise that the kids love. Students just really, they just want to beat it. And so it's a great example of the ability to get students to do something over and over again, which of course is what builds that automaticity. In this kind of a format, it makes it just a little bit easier. So what I want to do now is I am going to go back and I am going to stop sharing my screen. And then I'm going to go back and pull my file up, I hope. There, it worked. So just a couple brief comments and then we're going to wrap up. In terms of implementation, BrainWare SAFARI can be very flexible. It can be used in a classroom, a computer lab. In before and after school programs, we've seen some really good results in those kinds of situations. Summer school could be an option at least to get started in the program. Most summer school programs are not 12 weeks, of course, but often it's an opportunity to get students started in the program and have them continue then in the fall. It can also be used at home. One of the things to be aware of is that BrainWare SAFARI can be installed on as many computers as you want. It's all accessed through a unique username and password. And so the software could be installed at home if the students have computers at home and use partly at home. We wouldn't recommend generally having it completely home-based, but it could certainly be one of the ways that you enable students to get the time in that they need. So again, just to underscore that, it can be implemented really in a semester in many situations, 3 to 5 times a week, 30 to 45 minutes per session to get the kind of results that we've seen in our research. So I just want to provide a little bit of contact information finally here at the end. I want to tell you that we appreciate your time to listen to us today, and we hope that this has been helpful. Please don't hesitate to contact us. You can get more information on our website, and some of our other contact information is here. Feel free to call or email us anytime. So thanks again, and we hope you have a great day, and we'll look forward to talking to you in person sometime. Thanks.